The Eugenics Movement and African American Women, 1883 to present day. What is the Eugenics Movement? The term eugenics was coined by Sir Francis Galton in 1883 and is a Greek word meaning, quote, good genes. The movement peaked from the 1920s to the 60s and ended in the 70s. However, the event still lingers in society today as more information is still being brought to light and researched, and modern-day events take inspiration and follow different aspects of it. Powerful upper-class white people liked the ideas of eugenics as immigration from Europe and migration of African Americans from southern states to northern ones gave them anxiety as they were concerned with economic, political, and overall social power. These white scientists, social activists, and politicians framed this as a progressive social movement due to its scientific background, and it sought to rid and control society from the undesirable characteristics and people. Those that were considered undesirable and inferior were classified as feeble-minded, mentally ill, and non-whites. So any minority group such as African Americans, Mexicans, Native Americans, etc. This movement created the idea of the superior race, or the white race, and there were fit and unfit people in society. This movement was fueled by the racist, sexist, and xenophobic ideas that were already so prevalent in society during the time period. The methods used to accomplish these beliefs and goals included forced immigration and marriage restrictions, sterilizations and abortions, and segregation. Of this, African American women were one of the most targeted groups in society, as they were viewed as not being reliable parents, impoverished, and inferior. The beginning of the eugenics movement. There is no official beginning of the movement. However, Indiana passed the first sterilization laws in 1907, in which 31 states followed, thanks to funding from big names such as Carnegie and Rockefeller. Shortly after followed Buck versus Bell in 1927, which originated from Carrie Buck, a Virginia resident who was forcibly sterilized after she became pregnant from being raped at just 17 years old. However, the courts ruled it constitutional as she was, quote, swamped with incompetence, and her issues were generational. This started a segue for others in power to carry out these procedures. Similarly, the Asexualization Act of the 1910s and 20s forcibly sterilized over 20,000 African Americans and Mexicans as a way to further control the population. Hitler was also inspired by eugenics as he used it to promote his ideologies of the Master Aryan race during World War II. In fact, Buck versus Bell was used in the Nuremberg trials to show German citizens that what was going on in the United States was no different than what they were going through. The eugenics movement and African American women. African American women were already fighting for basic human rights and faced segregation, verbal and physical degradation, and were overall isolated from the rest of society. Most severely, they were sterilized non-consensually, often without them knowing that they were getting that particular procedure done, or with false promises, such as health care or benefits. Over 70,000 women were sterilized in over 30 states, and while African American women were only 25% of the population, they represented over 65% of sterilizations. Additionally, African American women were 3 times more likely than white women, and 12 times more of white men to have this procedure done. Prominent figure, Fannie Lou Hamer was born in 1917 in Mississippi. She was a civil rights activist and victim advocate who was sterilized herself in 1961 when she underwent what she thought was a uterine tumor removal surgery, but instead was given a hysterectomy while under sedation. She coined the term Mississippi appendectomy to express how common these procedures were in the South to African American women. More specifically, the victims were mostly institutionalized in the 1930s and 40s, but non-institutionalized in the 1960s and 70s. Either way, consent was not an option. Lou also created pig banks, which provided free pigs to African Americans to breed and slaughter. She also created the Freedom Farm Cooperative, or FFC, where she bought tons of land with the help of donors to divide among other African Americans to share. With this initiation, she also created a store and sewing center, and made sure over 200 units of low-income housing were built. The story of Minnie and Mary Relf. Sisters Minnie Lee and Mary Alice Relf were taken from their Montgomery, Alabama home in 1973 by social workers. They were recommended by doctors to attend the McInnes School for Retarded Children. However, this put them on the radar, and under a federally funded program titled the Federal OEO, they were sterilized at the ages of 12 and 14. They did not know that this was going to be done, as both of their parents were illiterate, had very little education, and signed consent forms without any knowledge as to what was on them or what was going to happen. In a lawsuit filed not long after titled Relf versus Weinberger, which the Southern Poverty lawsuit filed on behalf of the sisters, exposed the government for funding the procedures. The courts ruled that it was prohibited to use federal money for sterilizations, and practices could not give women false promises such as welfare or benefits. This case was also historically significant, as it revealed the over 100,000 minorities that were victims of these practices. However, this number is still unclear, as not all victims have stepped forward, and it is very hard to trace every victim who underwent these procedures. Facing the effects of the eugenics movement. Many of the African Americans were also put into institutions or asylums, either to be sterilized or until they were too old to reproduce. This just furthered the poor treatment, as conditions were often inhumane and never sought to help the patients. Despite the movement ending decades ago, the idea is still present in society. For example, a recent case involving a Tennessee judge who offered lesser sentences to inmates who volunteered to undergo sterilization. More recently, in ICE detention centers, many inmates are currently going under forced hysterectomies to prevent reproduction. This has led not just African Americans, but other minority groups to not trust modern medicine and care due to the past injustices they have faced. Despite this event being over a century old, there is still so much being uncovered and so much more to learn about it than ever before. Here are my sources that I used